Hello, I am your host, Tracy Otsuka. Thank you so much for joining me here for another episode of ADHD for Smartass Women. You know that my purpose is always to show you who you are and then inspire you to be it. And in the thousands of ADHD women that I've had the privilege of meeting, I have never met one that wasn't truly brilliant at something, not one. So, of course, I am just delighted to introduce you to my guest, Luci Taylor. Luci Taylor reached out to me a couple of times over the past year. She was keeping me posted on what was going on with her, sending me updates. And she shared with me that this podcast and learning about positive emotion and the strengths of our ADHD brain really helped her to get diagnosed. So when she shared with me over the summer that getting diagnosed helped her finally finish her book and gave her the courage to publish it, I told her we have to have you on this podcast because I, for one, love stories about young women who have figured out early on what it is and then pivoted so quickly just with that new information. So Luci is in her mid-20s, but when she was in kindergarten, she actually wrote her first book using scrap paper stapled together and crayons for show and tell. Today, she uses a computer to write instead. Luci's an avid fan of classic novels with spunky heroines and swoon-worthy heroes, whose goal is to bring to life unique neurodivergent characters to inspire others to be their wonderful and brilliant selves.
Yeah.
She also hopes to inspire others to pick up the classic novels that they never read in English class and give it another try. Luci lives in the Chicago suburbs and is always on the lookout for other kindred spirits. When she isn't writing, you can find her reading, working on her latest knitting project, or doing yoga. Welcome, Luci. Did I get all of that right?
Yes, you did. Thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
Well, I'm delighted to have you here. So, Luci, can we talk about your ADHD diagnoses first?
Sure,
I'd love to know what the circumstances were.
sure. So I think I'll start in elementary school and we'll like kind of work our way through school because it all kind of builds on itself. So in elementary school, my report cards usually came home with the standard ADHD for girls saying, she's a wonderful kid. But she talks too much. Right? I was in everyone else's business all the time. My mom was a teacher at the elementary school that I attended. So I spent pretty much all my free time surrounded by teachers, and in the school, I was there early before school, after school, the whole thing. So I basically grew up just surrounded by teachers. And I really credit them for teaching me a lot of the coping mechanisms that I used throughout most of my schooling as well. So as far as like friends go and that kind of stuff in elementary school, I struggled a little bit with like making friends and keeping them. Like I would meet someone and we would be like friends for a few weeks, but then we kind of like just fell out of touch and we just weren't able to like connect, school wise, like academically. I did okay. I never was tested like low enough that anyone was ever concerned, but I never really felt like I was reaching like my full potential and what I could do. I remember in one grade, I can't remember which grade it was, but we had this thing on the wall where there were different lily pads and every student had their own frog. And so once you move to the next level in like the guided program, you like move to the next lily pad. And I just remember like looking up and being a little disappointed in myself and being like, my frog should be so much farther along on the lily pads, but again, I never tested low enough that anyone was ever really concerned. I will also say I also really struggled with like spelling tests. I cannot spell to save my life. And so I do remember quite a few times in elementary school where I'd be sitting at the kitchen table and just like crying because I could not figure out how to like spell some of these words. If you would have asked me to give you a definition or to use it in a sentence, I could do that with no problem. But asking me to spell it was just the hardest thing.
Luci, were
Yeah.
you ever tested for dyslexia?
So no, I never was. Officially, I only am diagnosed with ADHD. I do think that if I were to test for it, I do think I probably would show up on the scale.
Mhm. Mhm.
For
Do you
sure.
especially struggle with, for example, the there, and there?
Yes. Yes. Or like your with like
Hmm.
an apostrophe or
Yeah,
without an apostrophe.
yeah,
Yes. Yes. I always have to like go back and double check and
right.
see like, okay, is this the right one? So diamonds are not a girl's best friend. It's spell check.
Yeah, screw the diamonds. Exactly.
You just need the spell check. So that was kind of me like in elementary school. So then once I got to middle school, I kind of did a 180. So my report cards in middle school started coming home with wonderful kid, but needs to talk to get full participation points.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes. And so there's a lot of factors that I think contributed to this. So I moved to a new school district and I was the new girl. I didn't know anyone. It was a much bigger school and I was a little overwhelmed with just all the kids around and the teachers, and the building itself was just so much bigger. Also, you just throw in like normal middle school experiences with hormones and all of that
Mhm.
stuff. So you have all that stuff going on. But also in my family, at this point, my dad was starting to get the process to get diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's disease.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so that was tough for the family to kind of navigate, like, how does this change what my family is going to look like moving forward and all of that stuff. I also have a little sister. She's 6 years younger than me. She also has ADHD. She also has a couple of other, we call them prizes from the neurodiversity prize box, besides just ADHD.
I
But
love that.
thank you. So she had a much tougher time adjusting to school. Her symptoms appeared very differently than mine do. And so when I'm in sixth grade, she's just starting school. And so she had a lot of trouble. And so she actually was diagnosed much earlier than I was at this point, just because her symptoms just come across differently. And so I really, at this point in middle school, I really found myself like withdrawing within myself more. And it's not that I had anyone in my life telling me I had to be the good girl and not have any problems going on, but that's kind of what the messages I subconsciously like kind of picked up on, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So I found myself just withdrawing, wanting to be small and like invisible, and I just really kind of shrunk inside my own head. And so I do think I have a little bit of the hyperactivity, but mainly it's inattentive, which makes
Hmm.
sense, right? Because you withdraw within your own head, and that's
Yeah.
just how things work. So that was kind of my middle school experience. I will say the big thing here is, again, school wise, I never tested low enough that anyone was really ever like concerned. I did have one teacher who did kind of recognize my potential, and she tried to get me to test into their accelerated program because she thought it would be a good fit for me. I failed the written test 3 times to get into this class, 3 years in a row. And I didn't really have like the words to explain like what had happened, like why I did it. And every time someone would be like, well, what happened? Did you just not try? And I'd be like, no, that's not it. But I just couldn't explain it. Looking back, I think it was a combination of, for the written essay, I would think of a word, but then I wouldn't be able to spell it to like use it
Yeah.
in the essay.
Yeah.
And so then I would try to switch it out for like an easier word that I could spell, or I would just have to redo the entire sentence or whatever. So I never was able to showcase my full like potential in like the written essays and stuff. So
So it was a situation, it actually sounds a lot like my son. So when he would speak, people would realize how bright he was. And so because he couldn't translate that into grades and schoolwork necessarily, they just assumed, oh, it must be he's just not trying hard enough.
yes, and you just put so much pressure on yourself, right? Because
Mhm.
you like like this, that same story with like the frog and the lily pads, right? Like I know my frog should be farther along and the
Yeah.
lily pads, like I'm smarter than this, but I just but again, I never tested low enough that anyone was like, yeah, I they were worried. So
So were you like a B student, kind of a solid B student, and every once in a while a C, or?
I was like a BA. Like I was on like the borderline between B and A. And everyone was like, well, if you just work a little bit harder, then maybe you could
Yeah.
have like that kind of stuff. So I was kind of just like on the edge of like B and A's, I would
B's and
say.
B's. Yeah. And so why would they, right?
Right.
Why would
Yeah.
they,
Yeah.
think that there's anything going on because you're doing that well? But can you imagine if you would have had, first of all, if you would have known it was ADHD, probably if you would have been tested for dyslexia. And I find it fascinating that you are now a writer, but I've seen this pattern over and over again, actually, because you finally figured it out, right? It just
Yes.
took you a while because the way they were teaching spelling and probably reading, did you have a problem with?
I can't say for sure necessarily I necessarily had like a big problem with reading. I think the thing with reading is that I get so into like fictional characters
Ah,
and I get so drawn into like the world. Are there times where I definitely have to stop and go back and be like, did I really read that sentence right? For just one example, I was reading something at one point and I thought it said, come pick up like free children. And I had to stop and be like, nobody's gonna give out like free children. Like, that's just like crazy. So I had to go back and be like, wait, what did I miss there? And it actually said like free childcare, but I read it as free children. So
yeah.
yeah, so there are definitely times where like I have to go back and like stop and be like, wait a minute, that cannot be right. So, but again, I get so like wrapped up in my fictional characters in the fictional world. I'm sure there's plenty of examples like that I don't even notice that like I'm reading it slightly wrong. But again, my mom was an elementary school teacher
Yeah.
with like so I had so I did have a lot of
Yeah.
support like on that end as well, which probably would have made a big difference if I didn't have her as an elementary school
Right.
teacher. If she had been something else, maybe it would have been a different story.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So you get through junior high, and it's really interesting because, like you, I was like no problem at all until I got to junior high school. And I think it was taking me out of the structure that I knew
Mm-hmm.
and all these new kids, all these new teachers, and then they didn't follow you from class to class, right? It wasn't, I think when I was in grade school, the new teacher would actually walk into the class. So if it was a history teacher, but it was still
Yeah.
in the same setting, right?
Yeah.
Versus in junior high, I then had to switch all the time. I was always late. I couldn't remember this book, that book, and then all of the puberty stuff on top of that, right?
Yes.
Where what I cared about was really not this work anymore.
Yes.
So it sounds like you had the same experience. What happened then in high school? You
So
got yourself through junior high, I'm assuming.
yes, I did. Yes. So then in high school, I ended up completely switching schools again. This time I ended up at the Catholic high school in
Ah,
town. And
uh-huh.
I definitely think I came out of my shell a little bit.
Was it co-ed?
It was not. It was
It was
all
all
girls.
girl.
It was
Yeah, so
all
we had the
girls.
same experience.
Yes.
Okay.
So it was a Catholic school with all girls run by nuns. And I will say this, like, it sounds like so crazy that ADHD, you need like more structure, but I felt like the structure that the nuns like gave
Yeah.
us, they taught the executive functioning skills of how to study, how to like
Right.
take notes. And
Yeah.
so I
And
did
for
come
me, they were a little scary, so there was some fear in there, right?
a little bit, yes. Yes. So I did a little bit better in high school with some of that more structure and some of that other stuff. Still kind of found myself like stuck in my imagination, my daydreams, whatever you want to call it, right? That's definitely kind of where I find myself most of the time. Um, but yeah, I did do better with some of the structure that the nuns gave. I did see like a little bit of a better increase in some of my grades in high school.
Mhm.
So that was good. I will say I was still not a good test taker. So when the ACT comes around, right, I was so embarrassed to tell anyone my score on the ACT because I knew if I told anyone what it was, they'd be like, there's no way. Like, you're smarter than that. Like, so, and it was so much lower than a lot of my friends too. So I just refused to tell anybody what the score was, and a lot of my friends were like, oh, you're just being humble. You probably scored like a perfect or something like
Uh-huh.
that. And I would just be like, oh, that's not quite it. But I wouldn't like tell them what
Uh-huh.
it was. But so they kind of believed what they believed. But that was kind of my high school experience.
What did you think? So, when you got this really low grade on it, sounds like you took the ACT. What did you think? Did you think I'm not smart? Or did you think I know I'm smart? What the hell happened?
I thought, what the heck happened?
Okay.
Like, yeah, because I'm like, I know I'm smarter than this. I know. And I was just so frustrated with myself. I was very, like, I was very embarrassed and ashamed too. But I didn't, and I didn't know why, right? Like, everyone expects me to do this well, but I ended up not. It was this weird thing, and I really tried to hide it in a lot of my test scores from a lot of people because they just weren't going to understand.
Absolutely. So, what happened then? I know you went to college.
Yes.
Did you feel like the colleges, and you had really good grades or pretty darn good grades,
I had decent grades, yes.
but there was a definite disconnect between your grades and your test scores?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, did you feel like you were barred from entry to the schools that you would have liked to go to, or were you just fine with where you got accepted and where you went?
I was happy with the school that I did go to. It was a Catholic university. It's about 2 hours away from where I live in the suburbs, and I was very happy there. I studied psychology, so I was happy with where I ended up with my test scores. I think if I would have gotten a little bit higher, I could have gotten a little bit better of a scholarship for
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
necessarily, but I was happy with my choice.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
great. So,
yeah.
it wasn't a situation like sometimes I hear the story and these kids who have worked so hard, they don't get accepted anywhere. And so
Mm.
they end up having to go to the JC. And I mean, ultimately, you save a lot of money. I think the JC is a great
Yeah,
place,
yeah,
to
yeah.
start. But I was just curious what your situation was. Okay, so then tell us what happened between high school and college.
So I will say my first year of college, I spent so much time like getting myself organized and trying to like get my class schedule down. I probably did not like take care of all those other areas of self-care that we should, right? Again, I found myself just like withdrawing within myself like I did in middle school and just trying to make it through one day at a time. Like that was it. Like, okay, well, what do we have to do today to get through till tomorrow? That was basically my adjustment. And again, I did choose to go to a school that was only 2 hours away from home so that I could just go home on the weekend or for a night if I needed to, because I knew for myself that I was going to need that closeness, if that makes sense. So
Did you major right away in psychology?
no, I did not. I bounced around. I took some data analysis classes. I took some pre-law classes. I took
Okay.
some psychology classes. I did take a wide like variety of classes too, but I did end up choosing psychology. Yeah.
Okay. But those classes that you were taking, none of them were really hard for you in terms of they all were within your skill set.
If I was interested in the topic, yes. There are like
Okay.
some units, right, that you're just more interested in than others. So like some units, right, like if I'm interested in it, I could do well in that unit, but then if like the next unit or the next test comes along and it's just not a topic that my brain is quite as interested in, I didn't do quite as well.
Okay. But all in all, it sounds like your first year of college was not a disaster.
No, I would not call it a disaster. No, it was more of like, okay, we're gonna get through this one day at a time, and I really relied on a lot of those like coping mechanisms that I didn't realize that I had learned from the nuns and from my experience with that really like helped me get through some of that, like how to take notes, like how to read a chapter and then like take notes on it. Like you probably can't read my notes. It was a joke between one of my friends and I that she would go and take a red pen and she would like change my spellings in my notes because I couldn't figure out how to spell them. So that was one friend that I had that would do that. So
How was it socially? Was it a pretty easy adjustment to find your people? And
no, I'll be honest, no, it wasn't. I spent a lot of my time like bouncing around from a couple of different friend groups and like trying to find my people, but I honestly, I think that's something I've always struggled with, finding my people, until like the last 2 years. I will say, like the last 2 years, I think I've gotten better at that. But I'd say like pretty much my whole life, I've always kind of struggled to find like my people that I fit in with the most.
did you have like a best friend in college or a
No.
group that you kind of hung with?
There was a couple of people that I did hang out with for a little while. We had a bit of a falling out. And my last year, I think it was my last year. We had a bit of a falling out then. So then I started spending time a little bit more with this other group instead. I did not have like a best friend.
Okay. So tell us what happened then, because I know, at least I believe didn't you ultimately get diagnosed in college?
No, it was right after I graduated.
Okay. So you graduate from college and it's a good experience other than you still feel like I haven't found my people.
Yes.
And then what happens? You get a
So,
job in what?
so actually, I was just lost after I graduated. I had like no direction. I did not know what I was doing with my life. And I just kind of felt like I needed to find like a purpose, right? Like, and I did not have one. And so I just kind of went down on this like spiral and of me trying to figure out, oh my goodness, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? Like, I don't know. And so at this point, my sister's 6 years younger than me. So at this point, when I'm graduating college, she's just starting to like kind of think about college, right? That year. And since she was diagnosed much earlier than I was, she had 504 plans. She had all of this in place. So I was helping her one day just talking about colleges and all this stuff. And I sat down and I read like her accommodations that she receives. And it kind of like was like a light bulb moment for me. And I kind of went, my life would have been so much easier if I had had some of these. And it was just kind of like a wow moment. Now again, she has other things besides ADHD, so they didn't all like work for me necessarily, but there was a couple of them, like having like time and a half on tests or stuff like that. And I was just like, wow, like my life would have been so much easier. So then it was just like this light bulb moment went on, and in true ADHD fashion, I went down this rabbit hole of research and research and research, and I found your podcast and your ADHD Brain is A-OK and all of that stuff. And then after a little while, it's been about 2 years now, but then I finally had the courage to like go to a doctor and be like, hey, look, these are things that I'm struggling with. My sister has ADHD. I have cousins and a ton of family members that all have it diagnosed as well. So here's everything. And the doctor was like, yeah, I think this is probably something we can work on. And I was okay. So that was my big light bulb moment about 2 years ago. And I was like, okay. I feel much better about myself and just feel like I finally understand like what's going on in my brain, like how it works, that like now I know what I can do, like how I need to find that purpose, like how important it is, right? Like that's why I felt so lost, because I wanted to do something that was meaningful, but I couldn't think of like what I could do. And so I refer to it fondly as my quarter life crisis.
Which is very common. There's a word for it, right? Quarter life, no longer midlife. It's now quarter life. But I do think that kids generally today, or young people, I shouldn't say kids, young people generally today, they're thinking more of that. They're more mission driven. They want to do work that lights them up, right?
Yes.
Rather than just punching the time clock and, retiring off into the sunset. So what happened then as far as you listened to the podcast, you did all your research, you were diagnosed with ADHD, you did our A-OK program, which I didn't even know you did it. So I'm delighted that was, part of your process. And it must have been the self-study one. And so you finally kind of put everything together in a way that made sense for your brain. You understood
Mhm.
yourself better. What did that lead to?
So that led to my books. So essentially, I've always loved stories and telling stories, and I used to tell my little sister all sorts of like bedtime stories about what our stuffed animals do at night when we're asleep, and all of this stuff. So that's always been like just a major part of my mind is fiction and characters and stories, and finding all of that. And so when I was doing all of the research into ADHD, I actually came across this article on Attitude's website, and it was this woman who had written an article about Anne Shirley from Anne of Green Gables. Now, this has been
Yeah.
one of my favorite stories since as long as I can remember. I don't remember how old I was the first time I watched the movie version, but all I remember, I was at my grandma's house and it was on an old VHS tape.
Yeah.
So it's been a very long time since I saw it for the first time, but she's always been a character that I just relate to so much. She's imaginative and creative, and she gets lost in her own daydreams all the time, just like I always did. And she finds herself in scrapes all the time. And so reading this article in the Attitude magazine, I went, oh my goodness, how many of these characters out there have some of these symptoms of neurodiversity and ADHD that are such timeless characters that people don't even realize probably nowadays would be diagnosed with ADHD or some sort of neurodiversity, right? And so then I just fell into this whole like rabbit hole of like going through some of my favorites and being like, okay, this person probably meets the criteria for this, because again, I'm a psychology major, right? Like I'm pretty familiar with parts of the DSM,
Uh-huh.
and so I would be like, oh, this character meets the criteria for this and this and this, and I just had so much fun with it. Like, I know it sounds totally nerdy to say, but I was just like amazed by how many of these characters that are just fan favorites that we just don't even realize meet
Mhm.
some of those criteria. So so that's when I started kind of getting the idea for my Midwestern Bookish Belles series.
Before we go there, I want to
Yes.
ask you, just following along with what you're saying. So we know Anne of Green Gables. What are some other stories that you loved that you look at their characters and you're like, oh my gosh, that is totally ADHD and maybe a little bit of autism or.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the very stereotypical, because I know we're gonna focus on the ladies here, but just the very stereotypical boy answer here is gonna be Tom Sawyer.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
he's not like the stereotypical hyperactive like
Yeah.
boy ever. So that one definitely was one of the first ones that I thought of, just because. But I
Yeah.
also think Emma Woodhouse from Emma, Jane Austen's Emma, I
Ah,
definitely think she would be hyperactive as well. And
uh-huh.
some of how she has great intentions. There's the one part where she like makes a whole list of books of things that she's gonna read, and then by the end of the summer she doesn't touch any of them. Or like, there's just tidbits in that one that I'm like, oh, I think she's definitely ADHD as well. I also think the March sisters from Little Women,
Oh, yeah.
for
Joe.
sure, for sure. Joe, yes, absolutely, absolutely, for sure. And then another example that I can just think off the top of my head, Mr. Darcy and Pride and Prejudice. I
Yep.
definitely think he would meet some of the
Yep.
autism characteristics there, for
Hmm.
sure.
Absolutely. So one of my favorites, I read everything that Beverly Cleary wrote.
Yes,
Um, Ramona,
yes, I love Ramona.
Amelia Bedelia, Pippi Longstockings.
I love Pippi. Yes.
So the book series that I loved the most, and I've thought about this many times, was Nancy Drew. I literally read all the Nancy Drews, and then when I
Okay.
was done with them, I read the Hardy Boys. And so
Okay.
when you think about Nancy Drew, I'm like, I don't know. But then I thought, yeah, but you know how she was always figuring out like these mysteries, right? Like what
Yeah.
happened and putting
Yeah.
them all together. And so I've thought she seemed very organized in the way she did it, but we can be like that too, right?
Yeah.
especially if it's in an area of interest. So I've thought about, I need to pick up some of those books. They were literally my favorites and read a few of them and then
Yeah.
decide for myself because it
Yeah.
was very clear that what I read, there were certain characters, exactly what you're saying, that I was so attracted to. I didn't know why. Like I love the little defiant ones. Like who's the little girl in the Plaza Hotel? My daughter has,
Eloise.
like I love the little girls with attitude. That is who I
Yes.
was attracted to.
Yes. Yes.
I
I will
love
say
that.
I still watch the Eloise Christmas movie every year. I love that movie.
Is that I wonder when that came out. Is that like a real, is it in cartoon? Is it animated or is that a real movie?
It's a real movie. Yeah, there's a real actors. Julie Andrews plays Nanny.
Oh, I must have seen that because
Yeah.
I've seen everything. I love Julie
Okay.
Andrews.
Yeah.
Okay, it's Eloise Christmas music movie. Okay, we are
Okay.
going to watch that. My son will love this. We are
Okay.
going. He actually probably will. We are going to watch this for Christmas because either I saw it and don't remember it, or I never saw it. That was clearly an area of interest, and I know that your goal now is to create these neurodivergent characters. This is what you
Yes.
love. And so, what was the trajectory of understanding that, oh my gosh, like I always really loved this. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start writing books and a series of books in a short period of time. I know how long it takes to write a book.
I will say I write my books for the 12, 13-year-old me who didn't understand what was going on in her mind, in her brain, and who fell through the cracks and was trying to figure things out. And so that's what I thought to myself of like, hey, I want to do something to help that little girl who's sitting in 6th grade who doesn't understand why she's struggling so much. And so that's what I write. I write books that I know my 12-year-old self would pick up and just absolutely adore.
I am curious, what was your writing process? I mean, it is hard to write a book. Or for you, was it not that hard? This is just something you've done all your life and not a problem.
So kind of a little bit of both. Did I have in my mind what I wanted, how I wanted the storyline to fit? Absolutely. In my mind, it all made sense. But getting it down on paper was what was a little bit trickier for me. So I will say, Anne Girl, my first book, I think I went through at least like 8 edits of that one before I even gave it to someone else to even like look at, because I'm like, okay, what's in my head is just not coming out on paper yet. Like I have to wait till I got there. Well, ever since then, I've started to get a little bit more of my process down of like how I can get it from my brain to paper and what I need to have, like different music that I have in the background that helps me like think or get into the right moods to kind of like write down the characters and the scenes. I've spent most of my life in my imagination, right? So as far as that part goes, putting the storyline together was not as difficult as I thought it was going to be. It was just getting what's in my head down on paper.
So, what is your process for that? Because one of the things I struggle with is I have all these thoughts and all these ideas, but then when I try to get them out, there's like a wall, and it's organizing those thoughts. And so what's happened is I will literally get 3x5 cards and I'll just start vomiting one idea after another onto these cards that's on my head. And then I organize them in order. And that's kind of where I start. I'm curious, do
So
you struggle with the ordering of what's going to come first, second, third, too? And I like the 3x5 cards because I can move them around. I can visually
Yeah.
see them.
Yes, I do something very similar. Instead of 3x5, I like different color Post-it notes.
Yeah.
So like I'll have like Post-it notes that are like pink. I'm very into colors, so everything is very colorful. As you can tell from like my purple background and all that. So colors are really big. So for me, so I'll have like pink Post-it notes that'll be like, okay, this is what I want this character to be like. This is what like, and then blue Post-it notes will be for like my male hero or something like that. And I'll put them down and then I'll just kind of like spread them out and kind of go through them that way. And then I do try to put them in an order that would make sense. But again, since they're just Post-its, you can just rearrange them. You can do all of that kind of stuff. So I'd say that's probably my top way of getting things from my head down on paper, and then just being like, no, I don't think this works, let's change this, and then see if it flows better.
What advice would you give to young writers with ADHD who might be struggling to start, let alone finish their projects? And it's so ADHD. It's not just, oh, I'm going to write one book. No, I'm going to do a series. And in
Oh,
2 years, I've already gotten two of them. I've already written two of them.
yes. Yeah. So my top advice that I would give is don't worry what your first draft looks like. Just make it happen. So just take all those crazy ideas that you have in your head, put them on paper, or put them on Post-its, note cards, whatever that works best for you. Just put it down on paper. Just make it happen. And then afterwards, when you go back, you can rearrange it and you can make all the edits. I think sometimes with ADHD, we're so stuck in that perfectionism, right? Where it's like, okay, my first draft has to be the best, right? And then you're like, oh no, but if it's not perfect, I'm not going to do it. But just totally, like, don't even worry about if it's perfect. No one's going to look at your first draft but you. So put all those crazy ideas down on paper and just make it happen, and then you can make your edits later.
I'm curious, are you the kind of person do you love, and I've talked to authors like this, they love writing so much that they are literally chomping at the bit. They're so excited to write. And then there are the authors who, there are times probably that they're excited, but often it's really, oh my God, you just need to shut the brain down. And like you said, just start.
I think I'm more of the second type, where it's like, no, you just have to start it. Because I think with like my inattentive symptoms and my hyperactive, like, just brain and just all these ideas flowing, I think sometimes it's like overwhelming to have so many like thoughts. And so I think sometimes it's like, nope, you're just going to sit down, you're just going to get started, and you're just going to do something. Just make it happen.
You also self-published.
Yes.
How was that process? Because the only way I was able to write a book was to have, a scary acquiring editor that I really respected and, cracking the whip behind me. I know I couldn't have done what you did.
So I do self-publish. I do have an editor that I did hire. So I do have everything gets edited, and I do have help with some of my book blurbs and my book covers and that kind of stuff. But I chose to do self-publishing because this is kind of like my hyper focus at the moment, right? Is like this stuff. So like I'm really like invested and like totally all in for it. But I also like the freedom of being able to make decisions. I didn't want to have to really listen to like my publishers like, well, I really don't like your character does this. Like no, my characters are mine, like in my head. Like I just knew personally that like that was just not gonna work for me. And I just like making the rules. Like, right.
Yeah, totally. It's hard.
And so one of like the rules of like romance, because my books will have like a subplot of like romance in them, and one of the rules of romance is you're only supposed to have one book per couple. And I was like, well, that sounds dumb. I don't want to do that because I wanted to make my books a little bit more ADHD friendly, right? They're only about 130 pages each, because I think that's what works best. And so each of my couples have 2 or 3 books that is going to go with their stories. And I think it makes sense with the stories I'm trying to tell. I think it makes sense. And I also think the right kind of readers that I'm looking to attract for, 12-year-old me, they're going to like that. They're going to like that. So I got to break some of those like rules that they tell you not to break when you're self-publishing. But I did so intentionally. And I do think that the right readers will appreciate that.
So the stories, do they take place in the present time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because what is the series called again?
The Midwestern Bookish Belles.
Midwestern Bookish Belles. And where did that name come from?
It just popped into my head. I was trying to come up with a name for a while, and I was asking like family members and a couple of friends to like try to help me like come up with a name. And so basically what my series is going to be is they're all going to be like modern adaptations or reimaginings of some of these classic novels that I think neurodiversity is plays such a prominent role in. So that's where like the bookish belles come in, because they're all like classic belles, so to speak. And I just thought the alliteration of bookish belles was nice. And I'm a Midwestern girl. I've lived my entire life here in Illinois. And so I decided to base the whole series just in Northern Illinois too. So that's where the Midwestern comes in from. So it honestly just popped in my head one day, and I'm like, I think it's going to be the Midwestern Bookish Belles. And my family was like, okay, all right, like, is that it? And I'm like, no, this is the perfect name. Like, I'm telling you, this is going to be perfect. So,
How many books are you going to write as part of this series? What is the plan?
so in true ADHD fashion, I have a plan. I don't know if I'm going to stick to the plan. So right now, the plan is I have 7 belles that I would like to focus on. And so the first one is Anne from Anne of Green Gables. And then I have 6 others. So, and each of the belles are going to have 2 books for them. But I also kind of, when I was finishing up Forever Anne, which is my second book, so part 2 of the Anne set, there was a certain character that I was like, oh, I really want to like write this character's story now. Like, I feel called to like write this one character. So that's like my novella, which is going to kind of be like a spin-off that comes out in December, just because that one character, I'm like, okay, so this was not part of my original plan, but like I just really feel like I need to write this character's story. So it's shorter, it's not as long. I do have the proof copy of it. I can show you. So this one, she's a ballet dancer, by the way. So that's why there's ballet shoes. So that one, so like I said, so there's going to be 7 belles for sure, and they're each going to have about 2 books for them. But whether or not I have any other moments where I'm like, oh, this character needs their own spin-off, I can't tell you, if I can't plan those in ahead. They're just something that happens.
Okay, so for now we know 14 books.
Yes.
I'm curious, what kind of teacher was your mom? What did she teach? Or does she teach?
She taught like reading and English.
Oh, so has she read these books?
Yes, she's definitely one of my first people I let read my writing. I'm very careful on who reads like some of my early drafts, and she is one of the only people I let read them.
That is so great. And so what does she think?
She really likes them. Yes, she's very proud of me.
Aw, I love that. How is your dad doing, by the way?
He's doing all right. He's been doing the DBS surgery. So it's like a pacemaker that like for your heart, but it goes in your head instead. So he has been going through some of those surgeries, which I think that they're going to be very successful when they finally finish in a couple of weeks. But we're kind of stuck in that.
Okay, but there's hope.
Yes.
I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah.
So when you look back at your younger self, like that kindergartner that was writing her first book, what would you tell her now, knowing what you know today?
I think I would tell her not to stop dreaming and remember to give yourself a little bit more grace. You know, I feel like when I was really hard on myself, a lot of those things were because of like my ADHD symptoms, and I feel like I needed to give myself more grace in that part, but I never stopped dreaming, because there's a lot of possibilities out there that you just don't, that when you're little you think are possible, but then as you grow up you start to think that they're not as possible. And that's definitely one thing that I want 5-year-old me and all the other 5-year-olds out there who say all their crazy dreams that they want to do.
That is so great, because when we're little, we have these dreams and there are thoughts, right? And so we act on them because we totally believe they can come true. And they do, you know, I mean, they're little dreams.
Yes.
But then as we get older, all of a sudden we shut all that down, right?
Yes.
And the intuition and just who we really are, it takes second place to who we think we're supposed to be in society. And so I just think you are a brilliant example of, nope, not going that route. This is what I want to do, and I'm going to make this work. So
Yes.
It's really inspiring to hear you talk about this.
And I do think, you know, when I had so much trouble with writing in school and all of that stuff, I've always liked stories, right? That's always been my thing. And usually when I was little, right, like even with the crayons, like this, I wasn't actually, writing or anything, but, I've always loved those stories. But then as the older I got, like the more I'm like, okay, well, I'm not good at writing. I'm not good at doing some of these other things. And then I kind of shut myself off from like those avenues. And then when I took the your ADHD Brain is A-OK, when I took that class, like one of the things that popped up was like, I actually really like writing. And I was like, wow, one of the things that I really like, one of my biggest strengths is that it's my storytelling and my writing. And so I should give it another try. And that was really the catalyst that I thought that really kind of pushed me to write my books, because I'm like, hey, you don't have to be perfect at this, and the spell check exists for a reason. So, like,
Totally. And your story. So you know who Dr. Edward Hallowell is, right?
yes,
So he has dyslexia and ADHD, and he has now written 25 books.
yeah,
Just because, there's dyslexia there or ADHD does not mean that is anything that you can't do. It's about interest. And I
yes,
love that you figured that out.
yeah.
So, what do you think it is about your ADHD that makes you so good at what you do?
I would say my heightened sense of justice and compassion. I'm able to put myself in the shoes of my characters. And one of the things that I have gotten back from some of my early readers is that they like how I do the emotions of I'm good at writing the emotions of what my characters are feeling. And so by being I do think that I'm very empathetic, and I'm able to put myself in other people's shoes. And I think that really comes across in my writing, because that's what makes it so powerful. And also just like my creativity, thinking outside the box, and like my daydreams, like, sure, should I probably come back to reality a little bit more than I usually am? Probably, yes. But I also think that's also one of my strengths, because it allows my like imagination to come up with all sorts of different scenarios and whatnot that I think come across in my writing.
I love that answer. You told me that you were really struggling to find your people pretty much throughout your whole childhood and young adult life. Are you finding more of your own people now that you are literally doing what lights you up and, fires you up and all of that?
Yes, I am. I went to this training class for writing, and I met probably one of my closest friends I think I've ever met before. That way, she does not live in Illinois, but she's probably one of my closest friends. When we were just doing stuff for the class, I'd be like, have you ever had this problem? And she'd be like, yes. I never knew anyone else ever had that problem. And I was like, oh my gosh, I do that all the time. Like, it was just one of those things where we just happened to arrive at the class at the same time. And I was like, hey, do you want to like go to these stations together? Because I don't want to go by myself. And she was like, yeah, that sounds good. And then it was just providential is all you can say in that moment, because she was probably one of my closest friends now.
I love that story. What it showcases basically is that the more you become who you really are, and you're doing the things that you really want to be doing, the more likely you are going to be attracting other people that are like you to you, because you're going to be in the right spaces, right?
Yes.
Doing
Yes.
the right things.
Yes, and we would be like writing down our like just our prompts or whatever, and I'd be like, well, I messed up, but I put a D instead of a G again, and then we would like laugh about it, because she does the same thing, and it was just the way it was. So yes, it was just.
And she's writing books too?
She is. She is.
Go
Yes.
figure.
Yes.
Go figure. Do you have a number one ADHD workaround, Luci?
Yeah, well, we kind of talked about it already, but I'm going to say it again. My Post-it notes and like colored pens, because there's something for me that like the colors are just make it so much more fun to be like, oh, I'm feeling like I'm in an orange mood today, so I'm going to write an orange. and then I find myself like more able to accomplish what I'm doing, and like crossing it off and all that stuff, because it's fun, because I get to change colors and stuff.
I love that. So what app do you use? Do you use anything like Scrivener or, they have all I tried them all. I couldn't use any of them. I'm like Google Docs. I'm curious what you use.
I don't really like any of those fancy apps. I use Microsoft Word, and that's it.
My editors made me use, my publisher made me use Microsoft Word. I still feel like I don't really know it.
Okay. Yeah.
They didn't like Google. Okay, so Luci, tell us, where can people find you if they want to know more about you? Where can they find your books? All of it. And we'll have whatever you say in the show notes.
Okay. All right. So my Instagram is at luci.taylor.books. And Luci is spelled with an I, not a Y. So make sure you use that. I also have a website, www.lucitaylorbooks.com. I also have a newsletter that's monthly. We'll see if I can keep going. I'm hoping to do that monthly, but just know we're not so sure about that with the whole ADHD thing. But my newsletter is on the contact page of my website, so sign up for that.
Okay, I'm just going to give you a tip, Luci, since you're here.
Okay.
Because like you, I think I had all this ADHD for smartass women stuff, probably a good 3 years, trying the whole time to do a newsletter.
Okay.
What you need to do is build the newsletter, first of all, off of something that you do regularly. So for me, it was the podcast, and I don't know what that can be for you. But then create a template. There's always, part A, part B, part C.
Okay.
And that way you don't have to overthink, in terms of, what am I going to talk about today? That you always talk about, these certain things. And so I think your audience then comes to expect that. And that's why, you start attracting the right people that then love your newsletter. And so if you don't send one out, they're like, where's your newsletter? But it was literally hell for me to do it until I created a template. And I built it around something that I do regularly anyway. So I don't know what that can be for you, but who is the newsletter going to be geared toward? These young kids, like 12 to 17?
Yes, anybody who wants to read my books, yes.
So I don't know what that would be, but think of something that you do regularly at least once a month, and then build it off of that. I don't know, maybe it's off of your Instagram, but have it start from something that you already do and you do well. What do they call that? Habit stacking.
Yes.
It's the only thing that worked for me. And now I think I've been doing the newsletter for 3.5, maybe 4 years now.
Okay.
Never missed a week.
Okay.
And I didn't think I could do one a month.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So tell us again where we can find you.
Okay. So I am on Instagram at luci.taylor.books. Luci spelled with an I, not a Y. I have a website, www.lucitaylorbooks.com. I also have a newsletter, so if you go onto the contact page on my website, you can sign up for my newsletter there. As far as where you can find my books are on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, iBooks, Kobo, basically wherever you can buy a book online.
I love it. I just love it. And I am so delighted that I had even the tiniest little role in basically helping you figure out what you're meant to do and watching you do it. I'm inspired by you, Luci. So thank you so much for coming on our podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So that's what I have for you for this week. If you like this episode with Luci, please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can learn how their ADHD brains work so that they too may discover their amazing strengths. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you here next week.